Welcome to the Japan Program panel on a new U.S. Japan relationship under President Biden. My name is Kiyoteru Tsutsui, and I'm the director of the Shorenstein APARC Japan Program here at Stanford University. And I'm honored and delighted to moderate this panel discussion featuring two leading voices in Japan. I will introduce the two speakers shortly, but before that, I'd like to set the scene for our discussion today. As we all know, President Biden was inaugurated last week, and the United States has closed one of the most tumultuous chapters in its history, a chapter written mostly by President Trump. And since the election in November, and even before that, many have speculated on President Biden's policy focus. And as expected, his initial move focused on urgent domestic issues around the coronavirus. And in foreign affairs, he has already reversed some of the America First policies of President Trump, and many expect him to pursue foreign policy agendas characterized by multilateralism and alliance-based diplomacy. And in Asia, China continues to be the most important strategic competitor for the United States. And although the Biden administration clearly recognizes that, much is still unknown about how its policies toward China might shape up in the coming months and years. One thing is clear, however, which is that Japan will continue to be a critically important ally of the United States as the Biden administration seeks to forge an effective policy to manage China's expansionist ambitions without unnecessary escalation in tensions between the two powers. So what is the role of Japan in this new era of great power competition in the Indo-Pacific? And what do Japanese policymakers and the general public expect in the coming months and years? And to address these questions, I can't imagine a better pair of people than the two panelists we have today. Our first speaker today is Senator / Councilor Ry Matsukawa, who is a member of the House of Councilors, the upper house of Japan's national parliament. Before running for office, she was on a path to becoming a leading diplomat in Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, having been educated at the University of Tokyo for a bachelor's degree and Georgetown University School of Foreign Service for a master's degree, and having negotiated a number of important agreements on trade, disarmament, and other important issues, and worked on cooperation with China and Korea. Foregoing that secure career path, in 2016, she ran for office and won a seat in the House of Councilors in her hometown of Osaka. And since then, she has quickly risen to prominence, serving in many important roles, including Parliamentary Vice Minister of Defense, Parliamentary Vice Minister of Cabinet Office, a Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defense, and many others. And in just 4 years, she has established herself as a rising star in the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, and many experts, insiders, see her as a future Prime Minister candidate. Our second speaker is Professor Fumiaki Kubo, who is the A. Barton Hepburn Professor of American Government and History at the Graduate Schools for Law and Politics at the University of Tokyo. He's an eminent scholar of American politics and U.S.-Japan relations with a number of influential books and 2 years as the president of the Japanese Association for American Studies under his belt. He is also one of the leading voices in Japan's foreign policy circles, advising many policymakers and appearing on print and broadcast media frequently to inform the public about American politics and foreign policy. He is in high demand at think tanks in Japan, holding a number of positions, such as the Executive Research Director at the Nakasone Peace Institute, a Senior Adjunct Fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs, and the Director of the U.S. Studies Project at the 21st Century Public Policy Institute. He was also a Japan scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in 2014, in addition to having been a researcher at Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, and the University of Maryland. And I have asked our two esteemed speakers to address 4 key questions in their remarks. First, how was the presidential election in November and its aftermath viewed in Japan? Second, what is the legacy of Trump's presidency, especially in terms of U.S.-Japan relations and international relations in the Indo-Pacific? Third, what will Biden foreign policy look like, especially as it relates to the U.S.-Japan alliance? Fourth, What should Japan's role be in the international relations in the region and globally as it collaborates with the Biden administration to manage the rise of China and work with other countries in the Indo-Pacific region and in the United Nations and other multilateral institutions? The two speakers will each speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll have discussion and a Q&A session. So the audience, please submit your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom, and I will try to bring in all of these questions in our Q&A. Now, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Senator Matsukawa. Matsukawa-sensei,
hello, everyone. Ry Matsukawa. It's a great honor to be here. And also thank you for the kind introduction, Tsutsui-san. It's certainly a great pleasure for me to talk on the U.S. Japan-U.S. relations, especially in this transitional, very important time. And before I touch upon the 4 questions that raised by Tsutsui-san, I would like to stress a basic view about the Japan-U.S. relations. As you may all aware, after the war, the Pacific War, we fought an enemy. And now, like over 70 years, after the treaty of Japan-U.S. Security Treaty signed, 60 years anniversary we celebrated last year. So and then also the Japanese are, if you take the poll of the both countries, Japanese people trust US 80%. The same are US citizens believe trust Japan 80%. So my point is whether, regardless of the administration on US side, or regardless of the Japanese administration change, our alliance has already a very stable foundation, not only just between the governments, but between the people as a whole. So this time, transition from Trump administration to Biden administration is the same. Japan will work hard to strengthen the already good Japan-US alliance further, not only for Japanese security or maybe US security, but the Indo-Pacific region, which is the most important region from now. The peace and stability depends on how well Japan-US alliance function. So we will work hard to strengthen the relations and further establish a good trustworthy relationship with the new administration. And I would like to say that the first of all are this time that let me go on to the 4 points. The first point on the capital siege, that was a shocking event. And also the Japanese people, of course, the government included, have very high attention to this time presidential election, US presidential election. Of course, US presidential election is a focal of attention by any country, I mean, by the world, because it's the world leader, US. But this time is more, I think, had a even higher attention because Trump administration is a very unique administration among the US history, I think. And transition to, or whether there will be a transition or not, does affect Japan's most important strategy on Indo-Pacific. How the new administration will deal with China is the biggest question. And we have been very keen on that. The other thing is how much US, this time election kind of showed not only to the Japanese, but to the world that how much division is occurring in the US society. So yes, we've been shocked, but at the same time, I also was very much reassured by the new President Mr. Biden's inaugural speech that he stressed unity and democracy, like 9 times unity and democracy, 11 times, I counted. And he called for the his commitment to work on the unity for all Americans, including those people who didn't have the same position with him. And I think also in his speech that, yeah, in unique American way, reckless, bold, and optimistic. And my experience with the US also tells me that even though the US has a huge problem, and then you go into this side and that side extreme, but I think it's a beauty of American society to have the resilience to always come back and overcome a difficulty and getting even stronger or even more resilient. So I also this time expect, although I think US society now currently suffered from the division, but I'm sure that the Americans will find, overcome this difficulty and then even come out of heaven in a better way, I believe. But it takes time. We expect new administration needs to spend pretty much energy for these internal issues. One is Corona, the other is, as I mentioned, the division. He has to work for the unity and economy. So many internal affairs will preoccupy the new administration. Therefore, I was kind of wondering how much energy left for diplomacy or security issues outbound. But yesterday, there was a very quick, it was during the weekend, newly confirmed Minister for Defense, U.S. Minister for Defense, Mr. Austin, called up our Defense Minister Kishi. In Japan time, it was a Sunday morning. It was Saturday night, I believe, in U.S. time, to make a new to reaffirm the commitment for the Japan-U.S. alliance, and also for the Indo-Pacific stable, to work for stable India-Pacific, and also, he reaffirmed the Article 5 is continued to applied for the Senkaku Islands, which is Japanese territory, but China is forcefully claiming. So these are the things I think very quick step by the Biden administration, and I think it's because Mr. Biden and his team are professional and they understand how they are viewed by the world, by Japan included. I mean, so I think it was really a good move by their team to sort of do the work in a visible way, sending a message to the Asian countries that US is committed to. US considers Asia Pacific is a very important main arena, and then its commitment is continued regardless of the transition. So that's, I think, the good part. And going on to the evaluation of trans presidency, I really, sorry, it's already come to almost 50 minutes, but I'm very thankful. Actually, many Japanese are very thankful for Trump presidency, in the sense that it is the first US administration to place China as a main agenda. Chinese, it's the first administration to focus on the security concern of China as the main issue. And also Taiwan. I think during the Trump presidency, US has become much more supportive of Taiwan, and that helps. Because if you look at the map, Taiwan is strategically very important for Japanese security, so I appreciate it. And the last point on Biden policy toward, what was it, with regards to China? Yes, I expect a continuation of the US policy on China, which means very tough on the technological, very tough on the strategic competition will continue, especially in the field of technology and in economy, and also in security too. Although I expect maybe the approach, the attitude could be different. As Mr. Biden already announced in his election accord, US will seek the cooperation in certain fields, like maybe the climate change or some, but it doesn't mean that it shows the weakness of the US. It shouldn't be interpreted in that way. And I think it's good for what we mean. Indo-Pacific strategy is a main thing that I think Japan-US alliance, we should work on. we should include India and Australia to support the freedom of navigation, freedom of speech, and then also the democracy. You know, those countries which share the strategic interests and the values needs to work to have secure network in economy, in security. And we have to continue to work to secure our networks. That is very important. And to do so, 4 countries, as I mentioned, not only Japan and US, but I think the Australia and India are very key partners, should work with the other countries like European nations, ASEAN countries, or like Pacific Islands countries to maintain the secure, safe networks in trade, in navigation, in norms of international order, so that I think China is very important country for Japan. We are geographically very close and we want a stable relations definitely. But I think the countries needs to work for making Chinese unilateral adventurous behavior doesn't affect in a bad way to the region. So that's for now. I hope the time is up. So I would like to participate in the further discussion and take questions. Thank you.
We can turn to Kubo Sensei now, please.
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this important event. It is really my pleasure to talk to the audience who are interested in U.S.-Japan relations. I will talk about 3 things. The first, the structure of the alliance. The second, perception in Japan of Obama, Trump, Biden as they concern the foreign policy and especially China policy. And the third, what Japan should do. A few words on that. First, I would like to start by mentioning the unique and complicated nature of U.S.-Japan security treaty by using a couple of PowerPoint slides. This part of my talk might be a bit too basic to some of the specialists here today, but I hope that it could shed light on the difficulty that the U.S.-Japan alliance has in a very inherent and distinct way. There have been countless alliances in the world history, but the most typical pattern of alliance, say, between country A and country B, works this way. If country A is attacked, country B will defend the country A. And if the country B is attacked, country A will defend the country B. This arrangement is very easy to understand, very simple, and looks fair. Compared with this typical pattern of alliance, the U.S.-Japan alliance is very different in its arrangement of rights and obligations. The United States is obligated to defend Japan, but Japan is not. Then is this alliance one-sided and unfair? No, because Japan assumes its own obligations, which is to let the U.S. government use military bases in Japan, not just to defend Japan, but also, I repeat, but also in order to be dispatched to outside Japan, such as the Korean Peninsula and other part of Asia. This obligation that Japan incurs is written under the Article 6, which says that I quote, for the purpose of contributing to the security of Japan and the maintenance of international peace and security in the Far East, the United States of America is granted the use of the bases. The word, the maintenance of international peace and security in Far East is crucial. It's a very important word. Why was this unique and rare shape of alliance born? In 1951, when the treaty was signed, the United States was fighting the Korean War. The bases in Japan were indispensable for them. Therefore, the US government wanted to keep these bases after Japan is granted independence in 1952. And there's no military in Japan with which to defend the United States or even help US war effort on the Korean Peninsula. Instead, there's Article 9, which you gave us, of the new constitution. In fact, United States was not obligated to defend Japan under the original treaty, which is shown here. This is why the Japanese felt that this treaty was one-sided and humiliating, which is why the treaty was revised in 1960, so that it became reciprocal in the sense that both countries incur or accept obligations. What is unique with the case of the US-Japan alliance is that the rights and obligations are not the same for the signing countries. Japan and the United States incur different obligations. The point is that many commentators say that the US-Japan alliance is one-sided or unilateral, pointing to the fact that Japan is not obligated to defend the United States. But as I said, it is not one-sided, it is reciprocal. But the alliance is asymmetrical in terms of the rights and obligations. Please note that I'm not using the word asymmetrical in terms of the military power or economic power. Now, there are certain weaknesses in this peculiar shape of treaty, which comes from this asymmetrical structure of rights and obligations. The most serious weakness is that it is complicated, right? And hard to understand, especially for the ordinary citizens in the United States and Japan. So it is no wonder that Mr. Trump did not understand this complicated arrangement. My guess is that former Prime Minister Hatoyama, who was in office in 2009 to 10, did not understand this complicated structure either. Another weakness is that the burden part, rather than the right, gets attention of the people and tends to breed complaint and anger. For example, for the American people, it sounds outrageous for Japan not to assume the obligation to defend the United States if the United States is attacked, while the United States accepts the obligation to defend Japan. Sounds very unfair. In contrast, the Japanese people who live close to the US military bases, like in Okinawa, wonder why there are so many bases here. Of course, there are strengths coming from this asymmetrical legal structure of the alliance, such as the increased and the more credible deterrence because of the presence of the US troops in Japan. But my point here is to stress that this complicated legal structure, this asymmetrical arrangement of alliance in terms of rights and obligation is vulnerable to a kind of populism that Mr. Trump embodies. Political leaders are expected to play an educational or enlightening role to its people. But what if top leaders agitate or incite against the alliance, against foreign policy specialists, and against national security establishment? In this case, alliance inevitably becomes unstable. Even in Japan, some politicians, not Matsukawa-san, but some politicians mobilize people against the alliance, against the treaty, against the government party, disregarding the ever more tense international situation that Japan now faces. In this context, it is epoch-making for the Abe administration to pass the peace and security legislation in 2015 against the majority will of the Japanese, by which Japan now could fight for and alongside with the United States when United States is fighting with North Korea. it was an effort on the part of Japan to make the alliance more reciprocal and symmetrical. Under the Trump presidency, because of the good personal relations between Trump and Prime Minister Abe, the bilateral relations were very good. But there are some concerning elements with Mr. Trump. It is reported that he said to his assistant that the US should discard the US-Japan Security Treaty because Japan is not required to defend the United States. Even on his seemingly tough China policy, it is reported that Mr. Trump asked Xi Jinping at the summit meeting to help his re-election. I was not sure to what extent Japan could trust President Trump to honor the US-Japan alliance. Trump was simply not a firm believer of the alliance. Now I will move to the second part, which is how Japan views the Biden presidency. For Japan, it is a nightmare if the US and China gang up and govern the world. Under the Obama administration, there are a couple of things that were a bit concerning to Japan. In November 2013, Susan Rice, in her major Asia policy speech, said that she was now trying to operationalize the two major power relations, which sounded as if she or even the Obama administration itself had accepted the Chinese vision of the world order. In the spring of 2014, John Kerry traveled around Asia preaching that the most serious existentialist threat to this region was climate change, which sounded a bit out of tune from the local sentiments. It might be true for the Pacific Ocean island countries, but for Japan, probably North Korea and China were at least more pressing and imminent threat. Then we saw Trump's China policy, which suddenly applied sanctions on China. It was whole of the government pushback against China. It was not just Mr. Trump fighting against China. It was the whole of the government approach. It was a huge break at the same time from the China policy that the United States has followed since Nixon. Having some reservation and doubt about Trump's individual motivation and goals, Japan overall welcomed Trump's tough China policy, as suggested by Matsukawa-san. Based on these experiences, Japan was afraid that the incoming Biden administration might be softer than the Trump administration against China, looking just like the Obama's China policy. However, given the appointments that were announced already and some of the actions and words by the appointees by President Biden, I'm now under the impression that its foreign policy, especially its policy toward China, will be pretty different from that of the Obama administration. After all, we are seeing a very different China from that in 2015 or 2016. If this is the case, it is basically pretty reassuring to Japan. Now I'll touch upon the third part of my remark. I'll talk a little bit about some challenges for Japan. If Biden is pretty tough with China, what Japan should do? It means that Japan has a lot of homeworks to do. The following is the short list of the homeworks for Japan. First, probably Japan needs to increase the defense spending and be more prepared for the contingencies. It is Japan still spends less than 1% of the GDP, as is shown on this slide. It has to overcome its version of pacifist populism, different from the U.S. Soviet Union Cold War. Japan is now more at the center of the confrontation between the United States and China. In many ways, geographically, of course, and besides, its own territory, Japan's own territory is being threatened kind of every day, which is the first time for Japan since 1945. And for the more short-term diplomatic matter, how to handle the expected state visit by Xi Jinping to Japan is a headache for the Japanese government. That state visit was supposed to take place last spring, but was postponed. It is realized, if it is realized, it will become a symbol of improved Sino-Japan relations. But at the same time, it might look as if Japan accepts the almost daily infringement of the Japanese sovereignty near the Senkaku Islands by the Chinese boats. Which option should we choose? This is a very different short time, kind of the judgment. The third, closely related to this, Japan has to think about how to respond to a possible Taiwan contingency. Japan tends to be insistent that the United States defend the Senkakus, which is of course very important, but does not think about what it should do if there is a Taiwan crisis. The tension is rising over Taiwan. And furthermore, Taiwan and the Senkaku really close geographically. The crisis on one area will inevitably affect the other area. So now at the end of my the presentation, in closing, this was a picture 10 years ago. United States helped Japan in a big way when eastern part of Japan was hit by the earthquake and the tsunami. These were Navy sailors or Marines, worked very hard for the local people. We still appreciate this, and this great help cemented the alliance at the people-to-people level, and that will last long. And in closing, I'll touch a little bit about the comparison of UK-US alliance and the Japan-US alliance. Many people tend to say that the US-UK alliance is a natural alliance. That might be true. But then what about US-Japan alliance? Is this an unnatural alliance? And, different from US and UK, in terms of the people, we are very different, or in terms of the history, we were very different, and we had a terrible war. But now, we are really good allies in spite of the many difficulties. So in terms of the world history, I think U.S.-Japan alliance is, is more even rare in the world history, and we should pay more attention to our alliance more. So thank you very much. I stop here.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your insightful and informative comments. There already are a lot of questions in the Q&A section. And the audience, this would be also a great time if you have any questions to add to that list, and I'll try to incorporate as many of them in our discussion as possible. So I've read and listened to a lot of commentaries about President Biden's foreign policy. And in every one of these commentaries, China is front and center. And also in all of these commentaries, Japan appears, right, in that context as a very, very important partner in trying to contain, manage China's expansionist ambitions. And there have already been some early initial moves. On the Chinese side, China passed a law last week that for the first time explicitly allows its Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels. That is a pretty scary thought for the Japanese Coast Guard guarding the Senkaku Islands, and also particularly on Taiwan. On the US side, I don't know if that was meant of any kind of provocation, but the de facto ambassador in Washington from Taiwan was invited and attended Biden's swearing-in ceremony. And also, as Matsukawa sensei mentioned, President Biden in his first conversation, phone conversation with Prime Minister Suga, reassured the Japanese side about the applicability of Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty on Senkakus. And again, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in his conversation with Defense Minister Kishi, again reassured the applicability of Article 5 on Senkaku. So all these moves seem to be reassuring to the Japanese side, the moves coming from the United States. And if you could share your views beyond what you already mentioned, your views on your assessment of the first week for a few days of Biden administration's diplomatic moves. And also here, I'd like to integrate a couple of questions, my colleague Tom Finger's question and also David Gossak's question. What should be the next move? What would you like to see the Biden administration do to reassure the Japanese side, to reassure Taiwan also, but without really provoking China too much in achieving peace and security in the East Asian region? What would you like to see the Biden administration do? And Tom Finger's question also mentions what would be sort of concerning moves from the Japanese point of view? What moves by the Biden administration would worry the Suga government? If you could comment, whoever might want to start.
Thank you for the question. And as for the Biden administration just started, only a couple of days still. So it's maybe too early to prejudge, and I think it's not very much appropriate. That's being said, I'm very happy with the first couple of days move, very quick. I think the Biden administration is trying to do what he promised within in the election accord, including the Paris agreements, coming back to Paris agreement or like WHO. So currently, I mentioned Trump, Japan especially, and not maybe the Europeans. Japan appreciated Trump administration in the sense that it strengthened the Japan-US alliance, partly because of the very good chemical between the Prime Minister Abe and maybe Mr. Trump. But I think already Biden administration understood that Japan's hope for continuation of China policy, Indo-Pacific strategy. And that's why very quick meeting between Minister Kishi and Minister Austin. And I think it's already showed that as he committed, U.S. new administration is coming back to international framework, like corporate international, like multilateral organizations, which is a good thing because all the the vacuum created by U.S. retreat was filled by China. So I think it's a good mood. And one bearing for the Trump administration, we concern was the lack, the biggest strength of the US is international leadership. Whether you are ally of the US or whether you are just partner or you are nothing, Still, if US says, oh, let's do this, or maybe this is a proposal from US, or let's do that, many countries follow, without any pressure. That was the US leadership. That has been a bit damaged, I have to say, during the Trump administration. But I think it's with just a few days, but I think Biden administration is showing the sign that it will be fixed. That's being said, I think we have to be realistic. China-US power balance is coming to much more, closer than before in economy and military. Secondly, China is, unlike Soviet Union, it's already integrated global power economically and also military. And for US, for Japan, for many countries, China is the #1 trade partner. So, we have to have a very different fight in a sense that to deter and also minimize the bad influence created by Chinese adventurous behavior. And that's what the US and Japan and US has to work on, continue to work on together with the other partners. And what was your second question? What is a worry? So far, I think the Biden administration is very professional. All the cabinet members and I think the business style is unlike Trump administration, based on the bottom up and utilizes well the advices from the bureaucrats and also the cabinet members themselves are very experienced. I think so far they understand the possible worry from the Asian countries, including Japan, and try to reassure, and they are doing that. I think it's a good start. One bearing is how strong that can be. And even though US has intention, I think Japan has to work much harder, much more proactive role in the alliance to support US role, and also not only just supporting US role. Japan has to have the initiative to create better Indo-Pacific framework in many ways, working with the other countries like Australia and India and European nations, which already showed the commitment in the Indo-Pacific. So I think Japan's role is much more, has to be bigger. Not necessarily just because it's Biden administration, but it's a trajectory of the US-China relations. And it's good for China too, actually. China is already a big power, economically, military, and technologically maybe. And it can be prosperous without scaring the others, to be honest. But they are doing that. So by the nations that share the strategic interest and value, working together to deter these possible aggressive influence of aggressive action, it's good for China to find its way to be prosperous, stable, great power without creating too much trouble. I think that's, I don't want China to repeat the same mistake just like Japan did before the Pacific War. So that's maybe my comment for now. Thank you.
Kubo-sensei?
Okay. Your question includes kind of a reference. Is there any good way to secure peace without provoking China? But any good substantive measure must provoke China. So there's probably no good way to do some positive things without provoking China. But I have some overall the first days of the Biden administrations is very reassuring. As I said, the appointments and some words and actions already taken very positive from the point of Japan. But still, there could be some concern about the Biden administration's foreign policy. Probably Japan will be concerned about the balance between its interest in climate change policy and national security policy. It is very well known that many leaders of the Biden administration are very eager to pursue very aggressive climate change policy. And that was one of the driving force of the Obama administration to keep stable relations with China, because China decided to cooperate with climate change policy, during the Obama administration period. But there should be a balance. Although I agree, under Japan, many Japanese must agree that climate change policy is a really important policy area. But it has to be balanced by the national security concern. Hopefully, second, I'm hopeful that the Biden administration will, go a little bit further about the Senkaku Islands. Until the Obama administration, the U.S. Government official policy line was that although United States does not take a stand on the sovereignty issue, but because the Senkaku Islands were under the administrative rule of Japan, therefore the Article 5, the treaty, was applied. But probably many Japanese, including the Japanese government, want the U.S. to take the stand that the Senkaku Islands belongs to Japan in terms of the sovereignty too. Few senators have spoken that way, very official way, including the late Senator John McCain and Marco Rubio. And interestingly enough, in the joint statement issued in February of 2017 at the Abe-Trump summit meeting in Florida, there's no mention about this sovereignty part because the Trump people were made up of amateurs, and they didn't know the policy legacies of the Obama administration. And the draft was written by the Japanese officials, probably Japanese officials didn't include that part intentionally. But anyway, we like that line. So I think, that the policy official line on Senkaku on the part of the United States should be maintained. And third, I am very keenly aware that it must be really, really tough for the Biden administration to put the United States back into the TPP or TPP 11, join the TPP 11, given the situation in Congress, especially in the kind of a current climate of the Democratic Party, which is basically against the new free trade agreement. But still, I'm hopeful that at the last year of the Biden presidency, like in 4 years from now or 8 years from now, the President Biden will hopefully try to put the United States back into the TPP. And, China has shown its interest in joining the TPP. And we want the United States, Taiwan, and the UK first to be in the TPP, before China, enters the TPP. So I think these are some of the requests. And, additionally, I'm hopeful that the Biden team will allow the international partners, including Japan, to keep the same name, free and open Indo-Pacific vision. I understand that every new administration has its own incentive to put a new name, although that the substance might be the same. But hopefully, of course, keep the substance is more important. But since this is pretty commonly kind of practiced and shared vision, I hope that the Biden people will, let it go, keep the same name. Thank you very much.
Great, yeah. And in that regard, I hope that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's use of the term free and open in the Pacific will be a start of the trend. Matsukawa-sensei, please.
Yeah, as a, because I totally forgot about the specific request part. I just would like to reiterate what Kubo-sensei mentioned is exactly what I also hope for. So and then in addition, the Senkaku Islands claim and Indo-Pacific free and open, this is very important. So free and open Indo-Pacific agenda, the naming is very important. And also like the TPP, although maybe it's maybe a bit difficult, plus the Taiwan strategy. I see already the continuation of the China policy, although it is only a couple of days, but also Taiwan too. I think, I really hope that the Biden administration continue to support Taiwan in a very proactive way. Not necessarily provoking, but proactive way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think Japan's experience with China in the last 10, 15 years would be actually a great lesson in tamping down the tension, so maintaining the good economic relations without escalating the political and military tensions going out of hand. Because Japan had its early brushes with the Chinese might in the 2010s with all kinds of troubles and massive uprising against Japanese corporations in China and so on. But the initial frosty relationship with Xi Jinping and Abe turned into very warm, if not embrace, positive relationship between the two countries. So it's interesting that when the Quad started in 2007, it faded, but initially Japan was the most forward-leaning, arguably, of the four countries. But right now, Australia arguably is the most forward-leaning, understandably so, because of its crush with China right now. And the United States also is probably, well, the Biden administration will see, but at least Trump administration was very much forward-leaning on that, in that direction. Japan, it seems to some observers, Japan is kind of backpedaling a little bit. And in that regard, I want to integrate some of the questions here. There's a lot of questions about if something happens in Taiwan, and I don't want to do any kind of fear mongering, but we need to think about what might happen if the tension percolates up into actual conflict. If something happens in Taiwan, what would Japan do, right? What exactly is the role of Japan? Japan cannot really send battleships to Taiwan, I don't think, but I'm not entirely sure. So if you could comment on that, because there are a lot of questions about that from the audience. And if I could insert my question, so the Trump administration declared the situation in Xinjiang as genocide. And the Biden administration, at least Secretary Blinken, agreed with that assessment. Japan, as far as I understand, the Japanese government has yet to agree on that. And Japan typically refrains from making those kinds of statements, not just against China, but also a lot of Southeast Asian countries. Do you think Japan would declare Xinjiang as genocide? Would it be desirable to do so? Okay. I put a lot on the table, but two issues, Taiwan and Xinjiang. Whoever might want to go first, please.
All right, it's a difficult question, and I might disappoint you, but actually, for Taiwan question, it's very complicated question, and I cannot really prejudge what Japan will do because it depends on how the possible crisis will develop. But that being said, Japan is firmly committed to Japan-US Security Alliance, and we will act accordingly. I only can answer in this way. And I also want to reiterate what I said before. The stable, peaceful Taiwan Strait is critical for Japanese security, our own security. So I have to stop here. I really cannot. This is an open seminar. And for Xinjiang question, yes, for Xinjiang question, yes, you actually correctly pointed out the Japanese government's attitude toward these human rights issues. We are committed for the human rights for sure. Japan has a long standing for the human rights, democracy, and peace. So, but that being said, we are a member of the Asian countries, and for example, like not necessarily current China, but before, or like the Southeast Asian countries, there are many countries which are still under development, and then also if you take the human rights issue or democracy questions, not necessarily you can just simply force or expect the same level of standards of Americans sometimes. So Japan kind of understanding the differences of the developing stage of the countries, sometimes be a little bit more inclusive about the comments. But that being said, I do think Xinjiang needs to be addressed. It's a very serious situation. It's reported widely, and I hope some developments in our governments too. But how far, I really don't know.
On Xinjiang matter, I noticed that there are now some of the members of the parliament in Japan from the opposition party, who are strongly.
No, the LDP too.
Of course.
We had a meeting.
Not just the LDP, but even the opposition party members are interested in the human rights situation in China, which is pretty new phenomenon. So, I'm watching this closely. Of course, there might be some political limits to what this group could do, but I think we are seeing a new kind of tendency in the Japanese politics. On China and Taiwan, after the Tiananmen incident of 1989, Japan was the kind of the first country to offer a helping hand to China after the incident. But did we get kind of a good legitimate return from China? What we got was anti-Japanese education of 1990s. So we had some big hope about China, but it is not kind of materialized as far as some Japanese feel now. And under the Abe administration, of course, Mr. Abe went to Yasukuni Shrine, which kind of devastated Japan-China relations, but he was afterwards pretty patient with China. Some Japanese citizens were detained, and but Japanese government didn't make this a big issue, and Prime Minister Abe even announced that the Japanese government would at least partially support Chinese vision of one belt, one road. So I think, that these patience kind of paid off, but while quietly increasing the preparedness around the Senkaku Islands. But, we are asking the same question. These kind of patient measures gave us a good return, legitimate return. I'm not sure about that, given the situation near the Senkaku Islands. On Taiwan, this is a tricky question, but I'm a private citizen, so probably I have a little bit more leeway to say whatever I can say. It depends on how the conflict starts. If the Taiwan provokes, then I think the situation will be very different from the situation when China provokes. So, so we cannot generalize the situation too much. But I think I can probably say that after 2015 peace and security legislation, Japan now has a legal right to exercise its right to collective self-defense. It is applicable to the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Then it, theoretically, it will be applicable to anywhere near Japan's territory, and Taiwan is very close to the Japanese territory. So I think this is the new thing in terms of what Japan could do. Of course, in for Japan to exercise this right, United States should be fighting over Taiwan with China. Then if Japan thinks that helping the United States has a paramount importance for the national security of the Japan, the Japanese government, the people itself, we could exercise this right. But it just means that we could, it doesn't mean that we must. But I think these are the probably things that we should be having in mind. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I want to move on to other topics like South Korea.
Before that,
Okay.
Sorry, just let me touch upon, I forgot your question on backpedaling part among the Quad. But I just wanted to respond. It's not the case. Australia became much more proactive because they were hit by China much harsh. But anyway, it was Japan which started this Japan, US, India trilateral, Japan, US, Australia, and which led to Quad. It was actually lots of Japanese efforts to establish this Quad, and also the Indo-Pacific strategy that was started, as you may aware, back into 2008 when the Prime Minister Abe visited India. So it's a long time development on our Japanese diplomacy side to establish this framework. So we are committed, and the reason why Japan has been able to enjoy a pretty good recovery of the relation with China, while Japan-US relations is also getting enhanced, is because China-US relation was really bad. China has to have someone to doesn't want Japan enemy either. And I think China is a kind of the country that deal with a nation which has strategy and a resolution. And that's what we did. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that leads to South Korea. A couple of my friends and colleagues, Dan Schneider and Mark Mulling, noticed that you left out South Korea as a possible partner for adding to whatever Quad Plus or whatever we might call, and they're wondering why that is, and also, I mean, probably because of the tension between Japan and South Korea, and you were actually directly involved in the discussion with South Korea, as far as I can understand. But recently, it seems like President Moon is beginning to make some moves belatedly. It seems like he regrets breaking the 2015 Conflict Agreement, and even he was befuddled by the recent court decision about the conflict women. Where do you see this relationship going? Is there anything that I imagine you would say this is on the South Korea to fix? But is there anything that the Japanese side could do to help improve the situation, considering it's the court system that the South Korean government is dealing with? I can understand that it's a little bit challenging, even if President Moon wants to make a further move. If you could comment on that.
Thank you for the question. No, I didn't include a name. I mean, doesn't mean like I would like to exclude. To be honest, if the South Korea is in the is more committed for the Indo-Pacific strategy, I mean agenda, or Japan is more than welcome, of course. But the thing is, I would like to make a point. It's South Korean government that hasn't really committed for the Indo-Pacific strategy. So, they are not very clear about it. So I really hope South Korean governments become more clear in committing the free and open Indo-Pacific agenda. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I do think the government of Japan and also the US governments too, Japan, US, South Korean trilateral security cooperation is very critical, especially for the North Korean issue. I mean, nuclear missile, North Korean nuclear missiles is a direct threat to Japan. And that should be the same for South Korea, although not necessarily Moon Jae-in government seem to think the North Korea is the main security threat. So I don't know whether we are on the same we're on the same page, but not necessarily on the same degree of the understanding. I really not so sure. And the third point on the Japan-South Korean tension, which is very unfortunate. It's all created by the South Korean side. None of any events was initiated by Japan, I have to say. This is a fact. But that's being said, I think because
recent years.
Yeah, because new Biden administration maybe takes off, I think Moon Jae-in, it's a good sign for the President Moon Jae-in to see that he has to, South Korea has to do something to fix the relation. Not necessarily let this, local court verdict will ruin the relations, the foundation of the relation, a very fundamental thing. So it's a good sign. And I think Japan has been actually diplomatic, the authority has been, diplomatic authority has been working to formulate certain possible solution. It's only South Korean government, unfortunately, can fix the situation because it's local South Korean verdict. Japan cannot do anything within South Korea. It has to come from the South Korean government. That being said, I think the two sides can work. So has been working, and I think can work, make efforts to formulate certain ideas to at least not to enlarge, aggravate the tension, and also to fix the court verdict, not going any further. It's all, the damage is done, but the damage can be minimized. For example, the latest verdict is very serious because it's the the Japanese government asset, not the private companies, can be seized. It can damage the fundamental relation. So I think the South Korean governments can stop that happen at least, and also to find out certain solutions within their country. We can support, but unfortunately, I think it is the initiative by the South Korean president. The government is a critical part, and if he's showing some signs for he's more proactively. So far, he didn't do anything. So if President Moon Jae-in is serious about fixing the problem, the bilateral problem, I'm really happy, and it's good for Japan, U.S. South Korean security alliance, and it's good for Indo-Pacific, and it's good for, I think, total alliance management. Thank you.
Yes, Kubo-sensei, please.
Yeah, just one thing to add. I think South Korea is fundamentally still ambivalent in its attitude toward China. Japan, in the case of Japan, Japan has clearly sided with the United States and Australia, and tried to recruit many other countries like India and the UK, France, Germany. But I think that the fundamental orientation of the foreign policy of the South Korea is still kind of different.
Good. We're running out of time, so I'll throw out a few questions, and you can choose whichever ones you might want to answer. One question relates to South Korea, but North Korea, from my colleague Curtis Milhaupt. What do the Japanese hope to see from the Biden administration regarding North Korea policy, and what are the prospects for U.S.-Japan collaboration on this issue? Next, about the more fun question about U.S. ambassador to Japan from Biden. This is from Robert Clennon. Who would you like to see in that role? If you have any specific names. Some people are campaigning for Cindy McCain. We'll see. Finally, about domestic politics, both in the US and Japan, and also China too, but domestic politics influence foreign policies quite a bit, as we all know. And in the US, as Matsukawa-sensei mentioned and Kubo-sensei mentioned earlier, division is a big thing. In Japan, the Suga administration started off with a very high approval rate. With the corona measures, pandemic measures, there have been a good deal of criticisms against the policy. And the approval rate has declined to below 40% in the most recent polling. And I'm wondering if, I've been asked about this often, I'm wondering where you see the Suga administration going, and is it the declining popularity? Is it undermining the government's capacity to address all those issues that we have discussed? So if you could quickly answer some of those questions, that'd be great. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm on, right? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, both difficult question. But for North Korean issues, already Mr. Austin had a meeting with Minister Kishi yesterday morning, and they talk on the North Korean issue too. And then they're committed to CVID, which means a total denuclearization of North Korea as a goal. We know they have already, North Korea has lots of nuclear capability and a very high-tech advanced missiles delivery system. So it's not something we can expect, the denuclearization come overnight. But I think it's really important for the relevant countries, including Japan and US and South Korea, to have to set the goal. Otherwise, maybe the short-range missile from North Korea, or even with the nuclear head, wouldn't to threat to US, but it's a direct threat to Japan. And I really hope that the Biden administration work for this final goal to be resolved together with Japan and other relevant countries. The method can be many ways, but this time, unlike Trump administration, I expect the diplomats or professionals will work in a more solid way to sort of manage the situation in a more professional way, and it could be helpful, hopefully. Although it's a difficult question. And for the domestic politics, yes, in any countries, in democracies, or maybe even China, they are not democracies, but they care for the poor. I mean, the popularity of the government does affect the overall maneuver of the policy implementation, regardless whether it's foreign policy or domestic policies, yes. But recent poll, if you take the very recent opinion poll, it comes up to 50 because of the vaccination expectation. So, this popularity rate can go up and down, pretty quickly. And I expect, I'm really, the Suga administration is not a good at advertisement. They are not good at public diplomacy, I think. But Suga administration has been doing all these necessary homeworks that's left from the Abe administration one by one, including the enlargement of the welfare package for the burden sharing of the above 75 years old welfare, and recently introducing the transaction of the land by the security, by the foreign, including the foreign investment, foreign person from the security point of view, or and then he's continuing very solidly with this Indo-Pacific open and free and open Indo-Pacific agenda, doing the Quad in Tokyo and doing Malabar exercise in India. I think Japanese domestic politics is also not very stable. But I think, I hope my American friends could be reassured that our government is stable and very solid about the goals. Thank you.
Just one thing about the U.S. Domestic politics. I know that about 85% of the Democrats in the House are against the TPP probably right now. But if you look at any polls within the United States, Democrats, rank and file Democrats are, generally speaking, more positive than Republicans on international kind of things and the trade. So I think there's some kind of twist between the rank and file Democrats and the elected members of the Democratic Party. And, this, I hope, this kind of a twist will kind of loosen in the near future. The Democratic member of the House don't have to be worry about the international trade so much in many ways, just in terms of the domestic politics or the election campaign, also in its international kind of impact. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Apologize for going over time. One last 10 seconds question to both of you. The Olympics, Tokyo Olympics, if it's successfully held, that would boost the Prime Minister's popularity quite a bit, but sounds iffy by the day. What do you rate as the probability of the Tokyo Olympics happening? 50% or better or worse?
100%.
100%? Okay. Good.
As a private citizen, probably 60%, but it could be without audience.
Oh, that's very optimistic. Great. Good to hear. Let's hope that it'll happen and it'll happen successfully. Again, thank you very much for joining us for the session today and sharing your views and insights. It's been wonderful. And to the audience, I apologize to those of you whose questions I couldn't include. I hope we'll have another chance to talk to you both. And again, thank you and have a wonderful day.